Welcome to the Know Yourself Revolution podcast. My name is Grace Gravestock, and I am so excited to introduce you today to Natacha Guyot. She is a PhD and a French intuitive guide, story weaver, and feminist film scholar. She's passionate about creating sacred and safe spaces for deep conversations around inner wisdom, intuitive practices, and shameless sensuality. That's what we're going to talk most about today. And she helps women and femme individuals live, work, and play in alignment with less shame and self-judgment. And she does that through sacred conversations, tarot, and other intuitive practices. Natacha, I'm excited to have you on the show today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Grace. It's a pleasure being here.
Yes, I'm excited. I appreciate the message that you have. I think it's so important that we release shame about who we are. And as on this podcast, our intention is to help you, our listeners, to know, love, and trust yourself. Because when we lead by example, we start with ourselves first, then we can be the best version of ourselves. We can be in the highest frequency. And my bigger mission with this revolution is to positively impact 5 billion people by 2025. And what is the purpose of that? That is to create a tipping point for humanity. And I believe that we can do that through free alignment and collaboration. So I'm collaborating today with you, Natacha, because I believe that the message you have is so powerful for our listeners to let go of their shame and to step into the wise version of themselves. And so when we let go of what doesn't serve us and we step into who we really are, minus all the conditioning and programming, we can be in such a better place.
Definitely. And it's also remembering to give ourselves kindness and sometimes even forgiveness as we shed all the conditioning, because I know that it can be tempting to be like, oh, I know better now, I'm going to all know better. And then we're still shedding all the layers, and it's not always purely linear. And it's being ourselves is also a big part of becoming wiser and our true selves.
Absolutely. So thank you again for being here, Natacha. We're going to go ahead and jump into look at your chart. And as if you've listened to other podcasts, you know that I like to start with a chart reading because it helps me to introduce you to Natacha, and you see who she really is and what she is really here, what she's configured to be and do. Let's go ahead and put her chart on the screen. And so we'll do a little mini reading, Natacha. And so the purpose here is to show what you're here to be and do. And it's also for our listeners, for you to see that there is a purpose behind everything that's ever happened to you. And so when you understand how you're configured, you can see that life happens for you and not to you. And so we're going to highlight some of Natacha's superpowers today. You may want to pull out your own chart and see what is similar about yours. If you don't have a chart yet, be sure to get it right now. Find out the work that you're here for. What are you uniquely hardwired to be and do? You can get it at whatsmychart.com. So let's jump in, Natacha. Wow. When I look at your chart, what jumps out at me is a couple things. I'm gonna say them right away. So the first thing is all this. So what we're looking at is your 9 energy centers. And so what that tells me right away is what you're here to become wise about, or we could say learn about through relationships. And that's all the energy patterns that are represented as white. And so if you think of yourself, and if you're looking at your chart now, I want to just give you a sense of why and how this is put together. And I'm not expecting you to know how to read it, but I want you to understand conceptually that this basically maps out how you show up in the world energetically. So if you think of yourself as, let's say, a Wi-Fi signal, and you think of these white areas as Bluetooth, the parallel could be like Bluetooth. I'm trying to connect. Only certain things are going to be able to connect, right? The certain things that are Bluetooth. And so you could think of those Bluetooth things as certain types of information that your centers are bringing in. So the centers here that are colored tell us what we're here to master in this life. The reason we get to master it is because it's something that's consistent. It's the only thing that is consistent for you in this life is all the things that are colored. And so each of these centers and these lines represent information patterns. And so they're either being broadcast or they're being received. And of course, there's a little bit of both all the time. But for the most part, that's how we understand them. So what jumps out to me about you, Natacha, and I'll start with that, is first of all, your type is a builder. And so what that means is you get to access, and by the way, 70% of us are a builder type. And so that is based on this orange square at the bottom. And what that means is you have access to unlimited energy when you are doing, and here's the secret, when you are doing things that not your boss, not your partner, not your friend, but you find satisfying, right? So the things that light you up, that's what you're meant to do. And when you're doing those things, and we're going to hear about those things, what they are for you, Natacha, when you tell your story in a few minutes. But those things are the things that you're here to do. And you're gonna know what they are, because they're gonna be the things that light you up, and the things that, let's say I called you at 2 o'clock in the morning and I said, Natacha, you're still up. We have to record at 8 in the morning. What are you doing? And you would fill in the blanks, right? So could you give us an example of something that you find really satisfying, Natacha?
That's, first of all, and there's a bunch of them right there. And I'm going to say tarot and writing, that I cannot pick one. You will find out during the conversation. If you ask me to pick one thing, it's never going to happen. But I managed to make it 2.
Okay, tarot and writing. Excellent. So that's an example. So I'm glad you pointed out there's so many things, Natacha, because a lot of people, when they come to me and they ask, what is my purpose? What am I uniquely configured to be and do? Where I start is, let's look at your purpose from a bigger perspective. I used to think that I knew I was here for a reason. And I used to think, what am I here for? It's not like the president of the United States, but let's think about that. A lot of kids are told you could be the president, and maybe you could, and maybe that is the thing, but it's not the only thing. So when I look at your purpose, and as I'm going to share with you in a minute, Natacha, what I'm looking at is all these things are part of your purpose. You're here to build, you're here to create, you're here to do things. You're here to follow your social interaction strategy, which means to listen to your gut, respond before involving yourself in, and you're here to be a mentor. You're here to have hidden talents that you go and explore when you're not working with people, and being a mentor, being a role model. That's what that public role mentor means at 6th line. There's a couple other things that jump out at me, that with the 2 centers up at the top that are white, what that means is they're open. It means you have 2 receiving dishes up there. And what that does for you is it gives you a way to pick up both inspiration up here at the top and a way of thinking. You're very open-minded. So because you're so open-minded and you're open to being inspired from something outside of yourself, you're going to also get a lot of intuitive hits, right? Intuitive insights, and you are very intuitive. And so you're going to have the effect of, for some people, it will seem like you can, right? And obviously you do that as an intuitive. It feels like for your clients that you do that. And part of how you do that, and you're configured uniquely to be able to do that, is you have these receiving dishes at the top, which help you to pick up what the other person is broadcasting. So for example, you and I right now are very compatible and different in this way. Like, I'm broadcasting from these top 2 centers. I'm broadcasting my inspiration. I'm broadcasting my fixed way of thinking. It's not right or wrong, good or bad. It's just a way of thinking that doesn't change for the most part for me. And because I'm broadcasting that, you can receive it. And so I'm sure that's how you work with your clients as well. It's part of it. It's not the only thing. There's a couple other things that illustrate how you're able to be such a powerful intuitive. And so I'm going to highlight some of those things. So this yellow center on the left, this is your center for intuition. And you see all the color. So each of these types of intuition that you have consistent access to are powerful. Let me give you an example. So this one, 44, this means you can literally smell trouble. And you probably know that about yourself, right? You can see it in her face, right? You have all these different types of intuition, and they also are associated with fears as well, each of these. So in the highest expression, it's an intuitive gift. In its lowest expression, it can be a fear. And so we would talk about that if we did a reading. And so if you wanted to find out what you're hardwired for, you could schedule a reading, kyr.live/reading. But what I want to say about you, Natacha, is you are uniquely configured to be able to be this amazing intuitive for your clients. And here's another way that you pick up all that information that helps you to be an intuitive. Besides all these consistent intuitive gifts that you have represented by these color patterns which we'd get into in a reading if we did that. You also, on the other side, you see this white one on the right. Now, what that is your emotional solar plexus. And so when your solar plexus is open like that, you and I share this, by the way, it means we're empaths. And so when you have an open solar plexus, what you're doing is you have a receiving dish for emotional energy, passion. And so what that can look like is it can look like in its lowest expression, the tail wagging the dog, right? Because if you're going to attract into your life through relationships, people that are opposite of you, and you could find out what kind of opposite people you're going to attract here. Anyway, that could be a whole nother conversation. I have a lot of things going into my mind about what that could be. We could talk about narcissists and so many other things, but you're going to attract people that have the opposite configuration here. And I'm not saying that all of them are narcissists. I'm just saying that you're here to become wise about these things, emotions, your value in the world. And for instance, these two white ones on the right. And so what that means is you're going to attract into your life people that are broadcasting that energy. And so that when they broadcast that energy and you pick it up, what that does is it gives you access, like borrowed access to this energy, which ultimately over a lifetime gives you a lot of data points to develop wisdom around these things, all these things that are represented as white in your chart. So in this case, it's emotional wisdom. You're going to develop emotional wisdom because you're, through relationship, going to attract people into your life that represent that they're broadcasting it. You're picking it up and you're getting to see different flavors. It's almost like if you worked in an ice cream shop and you got to try all these different types of ice cream, right? Eventually you'd become an expert at ice cream, like the flavors, what it does to your body, all those things, because you get to try and sample all the different types of ice cream. Similarly, you're going to get to sample through your lifetime all these different kinds of people that are broadcasting this emotional energy. And so that's going to allow you to develop wisdom. It's going to allow them to master their emotions, meaning that they're in charge of their emotions, not that their emotions are in charge of them. So I want to highlight that because it means it's a win. And I know we're going to talk about relationships a little bit here when we talk about intimacy and some of the other things. And so that's why I'm focusing on this, because I just want to show how you are uniquely hardwired, Natacha. Gosh, and I've been talking a lot. So I'm going to pause and just say, how does that resonate with you so far? Is there anything in particular that you can share about what I just said that resonates?
First of all, thank you, Grace. And that does resonate. I've been lucky to work with a few people in human design over the past year. So it's always great to see the little tidbits that are little nuggets here and there. So thank you for that. And also, like my two receiving dishes at the top, it's also funny because I always joke that I have to think like there is no box because my cat stole them all. I have 3 cats, but right now they're actually sleeping, so they're not in my face. But yeah, that's usually something. So that kind of worked with that, and that made me giggle because I was just like, this is definitely on brand. And yeah, the strong intuition, yeah, that's, in the lower and higher expression, because it's also like, we usually have some of the lower expression as we grow and learn. So it's once we know better, we can do and be better, but it's also without the growing pains or the growing experiences, we wouldn't be where we are now, or we won't be where we are later.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a process. I've learned that it's not about good or bad, right or wrong. It's about a different experience. And so the fact that we have these opportunities to draw people into our lives every day, whether we work with them, live with them, or just meet them on the street, we sample that energy and it helps us develop wisdom in any of these areas that are white. So I want to make sure we have time to get to your story. So I want to focus on one thing right now. And this is a summary version of what your life purpose is about. So first of all, I want to couch it by saying all of these things are your purpose and more. So we're just doing a mini reading here. So you get a sampling. So you're here to be a guide, a mentor to people by the time you hit 50. I can't remember how much time you have until you're 50.
I'm 39. I'm going to turn 40 this year. So it's 10, 11 years from now.
Okay. So that's important because what that tells me is with this mentor pattern that you have as part of your public role, you're going to have a cat. You mentioned cats have, we say 9 lives, right? But you're going to have 3 different lifetimes when you have a 6 in your public role, what that means is you have 0 to 30, 30 to 50, and then 50 plus. And so each of those is a distinct phase of life that feels like definitely a different chapter. In many cases, it can feel like a completely different lifetime. And so what is the purpose of all that variety and all those different experiences? The purpose is for you to be a role model. And so when you hit 50, you're going to graduate as a role model. And that'll mean you've pretty much been there and done that on just about everything. And so you're in that process already, and you always have been. All your life, you're developing all these experiences that inform how you're able to interact with other people. And so regardless of what services or products you sell, people have always come to you to ask you for advice, right?
As a matter of fact, yes.
Yes. And so that's because they sense in you this mentor energy. It's called, or role model energy of the 6 lines. You'll just continue. That'll just continue to get richer and deeper. And when you hit 50, it's like you graduated, and it just keeps going until you end this life. But the point here is that you have 3 different phases. So if you're in your story, if this resonates with you and you had a major shift around the age of 30, that's what's very typical for people who have this pattern. So if that is part of your story, then please do mention that, because that just helps people to understand, like, oh my gosh, this is real. So anyway, there's a lot more we could go into, but I want to make sure you have plenty of time to tell your story. So I'm going to just focus on this one thing, and then we're going to get into your story. So I'm looking now at your grand purpose. So on the chart, you see it's called left angle cross of demands, and we have 4 numbers. These 4 numbers make up 70% of what you're here to be and do. This means that these are disproportionately a focus in your life, these energy patterns. And so for you, here's what the summary version is. And when I say summary, I really do mean the tip of the iceberg, because these 4 energy patterns are wide and deep. They're based on the information in the Chinese I Ching. They're based on the I can't think of the word. Anyway, in the I Ching. And so there's a lot of information about each of these codes. But the summary version is for you, Natacha. You're here to improve and do things in a skillful way, and to exchange that energy with others, always demanding that your own terms are met in that exchange so that it is fair to you. You can teach this to others as well. So that idea of that exchange, that energy exchange, and making sure that your terms are met and that it's fair, and that you're teaching others to do that as well. I feel like that's probably going to show up in the story you're going to tell, because that's a big part of, let me see, I'm trying to get the right things to show up here. So anyway, so I'm going to pause and just say, how does that resonate with you as a summary of those 4 patterns, that what I just shared as your grand purpose?
It does, yeah. So no, thank you very much, Grace. It does. And yeah, when I share my story, I wasn't planning on mentioning it, but I did have a big shift, like when I was 31.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, maybe you could just talk briefly about it.
Start there.
Yeah. Okay, so before you start, let me just say, thanks again, Natacha, for being here. I think what my intention is with that reading is to give our listeners a foundation of who you really are. I think what's very clear to me in looking at your chart is you have very specific and that we've just hit the tip of the iceberg, but very specific skill set and abilities around this intuition. And we talked a little bit about the wisdom that you're here to gather in your lifetime. And so you sharing how to tap into your shameless wisdom is perfectly on point with what you're here to be and do. And so I want to say, first of all, just thank you for being and doing what you're here to be and do, especially as a role model, as a mentor. You are here to lead by example. We're all here to lead by example, but you especially, you're on a mission. And I know that you sense that in your inner being, that mission. And I believe it's related to helping others to tap into the shameless wisdom and letting go of the shame that we've been conditioned and programmed into. So with that, let me just give you the platform. Could you tell us how you came to do this work, Natacha? Tell us the story.
So, yeah, I think I'm just going to briefly mention, because to go back to your reading about the shift that I had when I was in my early 30s, because that kind of was a stepping stone to what I'm doing now, even if I didn't really realize it at the time. Do we ever? So I'm originally from France. I mentioned it in my bio, and my name and my accent sell me out within 30 seconds anyway. And I moved to the States when I was 31 years old because I applied to a PhD program on a whim. like literally on a whim. I was familiar with University of Texas at Dallas for a few years because I met some people at a video game conference, and I was visiting a friend in Dallas, and I was in a difficult spot to find a job and other things in France. And I had a friend be like, oh, maybe you can just go talk to the graduate studies dean. And also at that time, I had 2 masters, and I had quit a first attempt at a PhD in France because it was not the right fit for me. But I'm like, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to talk to the dean. That's the assistant dean. That's fine. Lovely woman. And she was like, by the way, the scholarship applications and the program applications are due tomorrow. Okay, 2 days later, in 48 hours, I coupled all of my applications on my friend's corner of her dining table in an apartment, like grabbing my recommendations and references and just be like, okay, are we doing that? I took my TOEFL English exam without any prep again, like the following weekend, 1 hour away from Dallas. I got in and I moved.
Wow. So you made a big shift. And I want to point out, so we looked at your chart, and one of the things that I didn't say, I'm just going to point it out real quick. You have the ability to make decisions quickly and easily with this orange, the fact that this is orange in the middle and it's white on the side. What the social interaction strategy that references is respond before involving yourself. So I just wanted to point out that you being able to make that quick decision and just jump in, listen to your gut, listen to your body was powerful. And it made all the difference in your life when you did that, when you listen to that inner guidance system that you have, that we all have. So I want to just say thank you for doing that. And if you don't yet know what yours is, what'smychart.com, be sure to get that. It's part of that free report that you get when you set that up. So yeah, thank you for telling us how it started for you, Natacha. That's amazing. So you jumped right in to get your PhD into this program. And where are you living now? Just people hear your accent.
I'm in Virginia now. I've been in Virginia since 2019 when I got married.
Okay. So you are US based at this point. And obviously
US citizen as well as of last year.
And what?
And a US citizen as of last year.
Okay, awesome, good. So you started your PhD program, and that led you to doing this, to focusing in this way. Tell us more about what that led you to focus on, how you chose it, and how that's played out to help you get to this work of helping people tap into their shameless wisdom.
So the work, my history as a scholar was mostly in film and media studies, but I was always passionate about creative writing. I had a lot with storytelling, with mythology, feminist scholarship. And what happened is that as much as I love that, when I graduated in 2021, I didn't feel like staying. I love teaching, but I didn't want to do this in an academic setting, in the higher ed setting. So for a couple of years, I'm just trying to compress I work corporate as a content manager, content specialist, because I can still do content in my sleep. And what happened, like the big shift the beginning of the big shift that led to what I'm doing now was early 2023 when I actually left corporate due to a very poor fit of the working environment where I was at, to put it simply. And at that time, I was just like, I can as well start my own business. And so during the spring, I did that, and originally did the responsible thing based on my background. I was working as a video consultant, but even though I did enjoy it, there was something missing. And also like I was trying to do a lot more tarot again, which I had done for almost a quarter century now. And then there was the thing. So I was barely starting my new business as a video consultant. And 2 weeks later, I had a miscarriage, which is never on anybody's bingo card, to put it mildly. And that led to actually a really transformative experience because I was working with a spiritual business coach at that time. I remember I was starting a program like the day after I was at the hospital. And she was really encouraging me, and I started to explore and say, I would like to support people with tarot and over intuitive guidance because I feel called to do that. And a few months later, like last fall during spooky season, I started offering tarot reading for business on top of my video consulting because I'm like, it's spooky season. People give themselves a permission slip to tap into these kind of things. And I'm starting to pick more clients there. I love the work. For me, it was really more fulfilling as well, even though I'm really good with video consulting. is that was not the same level of fulfillment and satisfaction for me. And kind of it was like in February this year. Apparently, I have my epiphanies in February's, or my burnout in February's, as of in the past couple of years. I was basically burned out because I was trying to build two businesses at the same time for 6 months, and I was just like, this is not sustainable. And then I asked myself, I was just like, which one do I want? And full disclosure, I always expected also the video consulting to be the big money maker, or what more people may need, but it was way easier for me to get clients for the intuitive side of my business. And I remember I think it was my partner or a close friend, or maybe both, that asked me, if money wasn't an issue, if you didn't have to earn money for the rest of your life, which one would you be doing? I was like, duh, I would be doing tarot and intuitive guidance and help people with that. Why? So it was also, again, this gut reaction in the body when you're just like feeling this opening up, really at the sacral and solar plexus level, I would say. And so that's when I put all my eggs, so my proverbial eggs, in that. And then the final piece that came to what I am doing now actually happened in April, because I was already, like, for me, working with women and femme individual and fellow LGBT plus individuals to really live, work, and play with less shame and alignment was already there. But the final piece about really the sensuality aspect was I got to attend a formidable Patriarchal King Summit in April, and that reminding me of my interest for king, for polyamory, for really inclusive in intersectional feminism, and also reminded me of how, since I was in my late teens, I never had issue talking about sex. Obviously, sensuality as a non-sexual and a sexual component, but maybe that's also because I'm French, but I'm just like, I'm not going to balk. No matter what you're going to tell me, I'm probably not going to be like, oh my God, what are you saying? And also, as a French person, I admit that I'm lucky that my upbringing, having really this sensual, non-sexual sensuality about the deep enjoyment, sensory-based love of life is really deeply embedded. And that's something, sometimes there's stuff you take for granted, and then you realize, oh, what may be basic for me can really serve other people. And this was when I was just like, oh, actually, yeah, I'm done with I've never fit in with the Puritan stuff. I spent 3 years in Texas and other things. And I'm like, we need to have more of this conversation. And I had some of them even with clients or with friends. And I was okay, no, that's what I'm here to do.
I love it. And I want to just point out, again, one of my key messages is life happens for us and not to us. And everything happens for a reason. So there's no surprise, to me anyway, that you're French, and you're part of your message and part of your genius, your unique genius that you bring to the world is you don't have the same constraints that a lot of people do because you're French, because you come from that background. And in France, I've been there a few times, but obviously this is also stereotypes that people have of French people, but French people are typically more open about their sexuality and more willing to discuss it or willing to be expressive in that way. And there are a lot of people in the West that feel very limited around expressing, about exploring, about talking about in whatever way their sensuality. So part of what I just want to highlight here, that part of where you came from and part of who you are is a really key aspect that helps you to be and do what you're here to be and do, which is to help other women and other people tap into this wisdom that they have in their bodies, listening to their bodies, and to not be afraid to discuss sex and sexuality and sensuality. And so to be open, but your very being, your very background just lends itself so perfectly to that in ways that very few people can, I'm not going to say compete. I don't believe in competition. I believe in cooperation. But the point is, with my whole show, is that we're all, when we're doing what we're here to be and do, first of all, we're fully supported in that. And we can see that in your chart. We can see that in your upbringing. So when your message is to help people tap into that, it's so obvious to see how your life circumstances have led you down a path to become an expert at this, which gives other people confidence to share this, to confide in you what their issues are and what their challenges are around this. So before we get into, let me say this. One of the questions that I have in listening to you, and I know that this is similar to a lot of people that are listening, is when you say tarot and we talk about sensuality, these are things that are not as concrete. They're not as immediately marketable, like you mentioned the video, but video part of a business that you had at one time or that you could do has more tangible, right? And people can see paying for it. But you're not the only one. There's so many of us that have these gifts, whether they're intuitive or otherwise, that are about intangibles. And so tarot is accessing that wisdom that is intangible. And so when you talk about that, I know this is going to be of interest to a lot of our listeners. How did you mentioned some of it. Was there anything more you can say about how you decided to just focus on this and to trust that this is going to work out as a business? Because so many people would tell you, if you ask them, you can't build a business on sensuality. You can't build a business on tarot or intuition. You and I know that's wrong. But tell me, for those people that are listening and they're thinking about their own situation and their own skill set or abilities, these are the questions that they're having to answer for themselves. Can you share a little bit more about how you overcame that barrier, that initial barrier?
Oh, sure. And that's such an important question. And yes, I've heard, can you please have respectable business, or all these kind of joyful, actually completely stupid questions. But it's also, it's testing you and standing in your truth and standing in our power as well. We're doing that. For me, it was really like the epiphany and also realizing that I was bringing together so much of so many aspects of my background. That's why I say I'm an intuitive guide and a story weaver, because for me, like, sharing the stories is also such a powerful aspect of dismantling patriarchal expectation or compulsory heterosexuality, or all the shame we have packed around sensuality and sexuality, especially as when we're not cis men, especially non-cis straight men. But yeah, it was bringing together.
Sorry, can you just explain that term for people that haven't heard it?
Which one? So when I say cis heterosexual men, it's basically men who were assigned male at birth and still identify as men as they grow up, which much of the patriarchy and its associated expectations and limitation center them above anybody else, whether it could be cis gay men, it could be trans men, trans women, cis women, non-binary individuals, or other gender expansive. Like, all the rest were not centered at all in patriarchal approach. So
there we go. Yeah. So thank you for explaining that. So I think that for some people that will be new, but obviously the people that you're wanting to talk to they're probably already familiar with those terms. Tell me a little bit about your ideal client and what they can get from working with you.
So my ideal client is, I am open to work with any women, cis women, trans women, or also like gender expansive individuals who are more on the femme side. They will recognize themselves if they identify like that. And I especially love working with fellow LGBTQIA plus individuals, because also as a queer woman, that's some of my experience, even if we all have different ones. But for example, one of my early clients when I started to do this work was a fellow queer woman who, even though she was becoming more comfortable in her identity over the years, admitted herself that she still held a lot of Puritan and patriarchal conditioning about even approaching sexuality in something that was not siloed, which was her words of everything was really siloed. This type of activity was sex, this was not really sex. And also there was a lot of discrepancy and challenging around solo sex versus partner sex and what counted as real sex or what was allowed or not. So I worked with her on a few intuitive readings using tarot and oracle cards, and also really holding space for her to start unpacking things. And because I do work either in community space or one-on-one support, and she has had several aha moments and epiphanies and has been able to start reflecting on her experience and really giving herself time since then to even introspection and be like, oh, what does it mean for me? What would I want to try? And I've loved seeing her even also add more sensuality, like non-sexual sensuality in her day-to-day life, when she's just like, oh, I'm having a slow morning this way, or maybe I think she said something about enjoying to wear certain texture and fabrics in the past, but I totally not added it in how it could improve her day. And she's going to be starting doing that again. So sometimes it doesn't have to be really big, because I think that's also something that I think people come to me who think that they have this big expectation, or because we have these big limitations and conditioning, that moving through them has to be this kind of epic achievement, which it can be. Don't get me wrong, it can be. But it can also start in really tiny and small things and still have an impact.
Absolutely. So the way that I see it is when we know ourselves, when we know who we are, that includes accepting ourselves for who we are. And so you're mentioning a lot of things that are taboo for a lot of people. Just the idea that, which seems ridiculous, but I'm just going to say it, that we aren't all the same, that we have different preferences, and that we're born with that, and that we're configured that way. And we're configured that way for a reason. And I trust that you can see, and I'm speaking now to the listener, that you can see how when you look at your chart, you can see that your purpose is to develop wisdom around all these things. And you're going to bring into your life people and relationships that are going to help you learn about these things. So your configuration and your preferences about sex and sexuality and sensuality is all part of that picture to help you develop the wisdom and help you to develop mastery around those patterns that you're here to develop. And so just to give a quick example, I want to look at this blue section. It's your throat. Everybody can understand like your throat. That's about speaking. It's about manifesting. It's about creating in the world. And so it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with sex. And yet it does have everything to do with sex, because it has to do with your speaking. For in your case, because this green one is colored in, you have a truth that's consistent for you, your identity, and that colored line between the throat and your identity center. And that means you're here to speak your truth. And so you sharing your truth is a way that helps other people to accept themselves. Just hearing your story gives permission for me, if I'm different, to say, oh, maybe there's nothing wrong with my preferences. Maybe there's, even though society might have told me that I'm different, and now I can see all these different reasons and ways that I'm fully supported in being and doing what I'm here to be and do, which might be very different than everyone else around me.
And that's the beauty of it. And that's also a reason why, because you were mentioning the throat and the sharing the stories and everything and the speaking, which is why also when I talk about tapping into your senses, I talk about 6 senses, because for me, there's the basic sight and hearing, taste, smell, and touch, but I also include the brain in that, and not in the being caught in our mind type of thing, but the brain can not only be a powerful sexual organ, but it also has such a big role in storytelling and in immersive capabilities, because we can gain a lot of pleasure from like reading, for example, and we're just having our brain hallucinate over pages of paper or on a screen, basically.
Right, and I think most people probably by now know that the mind cannot differentiate, doesn't necessarily, or the body doesn't necessarily differentiate between thinking about like what's actually real and what we're imagining as real. So that plays a really important part in what you're saying, that when you say brain, that's what I think of. Mm-hmm. And helping people use their imagination, helping your clients tap into the shameless wisdom that is in their body, getting connected to their body, getting out of their heads. I know that's one of my life challenges, is with a fixed way of thinking, as my configuration is opposite of yours. It's been a challenge for me to get out of my head and get into my body. And so what I appreciate about one of the things I appreciate about what you share with your clients is how to do that and how to get into their body. And so you mentioned the textures, for instance, as just a small example of how you would help people to really think more expansively about expressing themselves, full expression of yourself. That's what I'm all about too with the Know Yourself Revolution. So when we are the fullest expression of who we are, that is when we feel the most fulfillment in our lives, right? And that's also when we can be playing out the highest expression of the energy patterns that we're here to represent. And we can have the biggest impact in the world if we're wanting to do that. We can enjoy better relationships. So all of that is possible when we listen to our bodies, when we tap into that shameless wisdom that's inside of us. And I appreciate that you do that for people who want support in that. Now, I want to focus on one thing before we run out of time. We've titled this How to Tap into Your Shameless Wisdom. So that is going to be a trigger for some people, shame. Can you talk a little bit about how you help your clients to overcome the shame they might have, or to even think about shame in a different way? How do you deal with that? Because clearly people who would come to you, for a lot of people, that's a very common thing to have shame. So what do we do with that, and that's obviously a barrier to full expression. So how do you help your clients with that shame?
One of the first thing is that I let them share however much or little they want, because this is something you cannot force expressing, because it's extremely personal, and we all have our own stories, our own journey. But for me, it's really creating that space, that safe space where we're going to start talking. Sometimes it can be innocuous and then move into much deeper things. And one thing for me, for example, that I don't believe in is I do not believe in the tough love aspect. For me, just like we can be truth tellers while still doing that with kindness. And the tough love is usually, I've seen that wrapped into also toxic positivity and overthink. And that's something that personally I do not subscribe to. So this is why I'm like trying to really hold safe and kind containers for my clients. And also one of the powers of doing intuitive readings is that they may have more specific questions or start sharing more. But even if they do not volunteer something from the get-go, the cards usually are so rich with symbolism that often I see my clients be like really caught into something on a card and then be like, oh, do you think it could be related to XYZ? Or if I see something in the card and share it with them, that may open something for them to like tiptoeing out of things, and which could still keep them sharing something that they were shamed about or that they feel shame about. Sometimes a lot, sometimes they're going to suddenly share a lot of trauma even in the middle of it. And again, I am not a professional. For me, it's really being a story reader. I have a lot of experience, but I always admit that if I'm not here to replace a healing professional, for example, this is just an alternative modality. And I encourage, if it works for people, to find a healing professional that culturally and individually support them, to go for it. But it's really this kind of story weaving and sacred conversation kind of approach that I do, that most of the time they're either going to share something during the session, and sometimes I also always share prompts with them that they may use for journaling or meditation or something, so they already have some guidelines to work by themselves or talk with somebody else.
That's excellent. Yeah, so I think just what I hear you saying is, first of all, acknowledging that there is something that we're trying to keep secret and bringing that out into the open. And so as you work with clients using those tools like tarot or your intuitive insights, being able to tap into that and help people to speak. I just want to point out one other thing here. Again, I'm bringing Dawn to this. So when you have a colored in throat chakra, what that means is not only are you, Natacha, meant to speak your truth, but you're also here to give other people a voice. So mastering that ability to speak. What it means when you have a colored in throat like that is it means that people tend to listen to you when you speak. And so part of your mastery is in giving them a voice. And so I just want to showcase now, it's clear to me that is one of the things that you're doing. You're helping other people to tap into their wisdom by giving them a voice in a way that they couldn't do on their own, because maybe of shame or some other reason they're not able to express what they really prefer or what they really want, because it's different than whatever their family thinks they should be wanting or the society has told them. And I'm all about helping people know, love, and trust themselves as they are, because I know that when we accept ourselves for who we are, that's when a whole nother world opens up, and we can let go of the secrecy. We can let go of the shame. We can let go of the limitations that are holding us back. I used to be in a relationship with somebody that was in the closet about their sexuality, and it was toxic for them to try to live a double life, to live a secret life. And it was a real issue when I realized that this was what's going on. But I'm mentioning it because I can speak from experience and say how much I appreciate you helping people to have a voice and to not only speak what they want, but even just to acknowledge who they are in a different way. Because when who you are and how you see yourself and how you present yourself is so different. And if we're talking about sexuality, that's a big part of our lives, right? And so if who I'm projecting myself to the world is very different than who I know myself to be, that's going to create a lot of disconnects in my life. That's going to be painful. It's going to show up as pain. So I just want to support and acknowledge that what you're really doing in the world is creating healing simply, even if it was just as simple as giving people a voice to help them recognize who they are and give voice to express what's true for them, even if it was just that. And I know it's way more than that, but I'm just saying, even if it was just that, the difference that is making in individuals' lives that you work with, I have no doubt, is phenomenal. That is world changing. So together, you're a role model. I'm here to be a visionary leader. Together, we are changing the world by being and doing what we are here to be and do, what we're uniquely configured to be and do, and what we're fully supported in being and doing. And so I'm referencing now the fact that you're French, the fact that you have that whole, your own preferences influence who you are and how you show up in the world and who you want to help. And so all of that helps you to do just this, which makes our world a better place. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Grace. And it's just one tiny thing, because I know we're running out of time, but it's also like one of the way for me that I find so important with giving voice to my clients and helping them is that sometimes it's also, we realize that it's not safe to come out, whatever that coming out may be, because some environments are not safe. But starting by understanding, acknowledging, and living, even if it's just for themselves, that truth, even if it's going to take time for them to be able to express it more outwardly, can be such an important part.
Absolutely. Yeah, such an important part. I couldn't agree more. Talk a little bit about your free sensuality guide to shameless wisdom, if you could, Natacha. I think this is an important next step for people who are interested in working with you or understanding more about their own sensuality and how to explore that. Can you tell us a little bit more about what's there when people download this guide?
Of course. So this guide is, earlier we were talking about the little changes you can make already just to add more sensuality in your life. And this is exactly what this guide is. Do not let it be daunting, but it has 84 suggestions of how to add more sensuality in your life. Do not be daunted. You do not have to do all of them at once. You can really, it's more like a pick and choose and really seeing for inspiration, because I have 42 that are non-sexual, 42 that are sexual suggestion, and all broken down by each of the 6 senses. So you can really, like, if you're like, I need a little pick-me-up, or is there something I'm already doing in my life? It's really like here to be your toolbox or your toy box. And many of them do not require additional investment. It takes into account various abilities. Many of them you can do on your own. So it really is here to help you experiment, explore, have fun, and also giving you the opportunity to keep that as much to yourself as you may want it to be.
I love that. Thank you so much. What a valuable gift. So get your free sensuality guide to shameless wisdom. If this resonates with you, kyr.life/shameless. I want to just share something personal, but I think it supports what you're doing. So when I first you mentioned toy box. So when I first, after my divorce, and I went into a phase of exploring a lot of things, I started exploring different tools to enrich my life. And so when I was looking at that, what was the most surprising thing about what that did for me, just opening up my willingness to consider new possibilities, open up my willingness, be aware and willing to consider new ways of living, working, and being. Another one of my key messages. But all of that, what that surprisingly did for me more than anything else, I actually didn't really find toys that I really liked that much per se, but what it did for me was even more important, I think, and that was helping me realize that I am responsible for my own pleasure. I am responsible for my own experience in this life, and it's not only unfair to expect somebody else to be responsible for my experience, but it's very detrimental to me because I'm not honoring my own preferences and my own voice. And so that was a really powerful lesson and unexpected that I got from just putting on a party, inviting my friends and having somebody talk about different toys and tools and things to put in your toy chest. So I want to encourage you to get Natacha's Free Sensuality Guide to Shameless Wisdom if this resonates with you. I love that you have both sexual and non-sexual suggestions, because really that appeals to everyone who, regardless of where they are in their journey with their own sensuality, their own sexuality, their own level of shame or not shame, it gives everybody a place to start. And I think that when we are more fully expressed, however we express that, whether we think of it in terms of sex or not, the point is when we are fully expressed, that is when life can be much more yummy, much more satisfying, much more fulfilling. And so many people come to me asking me for guidance on their life purpose and their life. And what I realize, and I, again, speaking from my own experience, is if we limit our view of who we are and what we're here for just to the cold, hard facts of what feels like what's so much in the now, like I just got to get a job, or I got to get a different career, or a different partner. When we just think in those terms, we're missing so much. So I love that your guide is going to help us to explore and expand our willingness to try new things, be open to new ways of living, working, and being, because who's to say that one thing that you try isn't going to just open up a whole new world, not just of possibility for you, but of pleasure and satisfaction and fulfillment. And it doesn't even necessarily need to be sexual, like you mentioned, just fabrics, becoming aware of the fabrics that we choose. I like this one because it's soft, and I like this necklace because of the texture, and I like that it's three-dimensional. There's just so many little things that I've learned about myself in regards to sensuality. What is sensuality? It's what it feels good to me in my body. And if you're curious about this and you're interested in exploring further, please get Natacha's Free Sensuality Guide to Shameless Wisdom. Thank you for studying this, Natacha. Thank you for being brave enough to put this out in the world to help each person who comes to your guide, even if you don't work with them, you've made an impact. So thank you for changing the world for the better, because when we're more fully expressed, when we know, love, and trust ourselves, the world becomes open to us, unlimited in terms of our possibilities. So I'm so grateful for you doing your work and doing what you're here to be and do, Natacha. Thank you. Is there anything else that you'd want to say, parting words with anybody that might be skeptical about exploring in this way?
First of all, thank you very much for having me on and for such a wonderful reading and conversation, Grace. And my question is, if you're not sure about that, it's a free guide. And what do you have to lose?
Exactly. What do you have to lose? Nothing. So it's free, kyr.life/shameless. Thank you again for being on the show, Natacha. I'm so grateful for the work you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing and keep living your life, being and doing what you're here to be and do, because when you do that, you raise your frequency, you raise the frequency of those around you, and you exponentially change the world. And together we can create a tipping point for humanity when we help others know, love, and trust themselves. Thanks so much for being on the show.